BooTube, what is up? I forgot what part this is. I don't know how many videos I already made beforehand, so I'm not even gonna try. But here is more reason why I think my number one pick, Abraham, is the one that Negan killed at the end of season 6. And also I will be going over in this video why my first 3 picks, Abraham, Daryl, and Glenn, I'm gonna give you more reason why I think those 3 are the 3 main suspects in this who did Negan kill thing. But anyway, here's my more reason why I think Abraham was in fact the victim of Negan. In the first look, we see that like I said, they zoomed out from the RV and zoomed in on the carnage. Judging by that, because literally the door of the RV, like I said, they zoomed out from the RV and zoomed in on the carnage, but the camera was completely straight. So that means the carnage, the dead person that Negan killed, their point of view, literally what is in fact right there in front of them is the door to the RV, right? And looking at the picture, judging by that, that means the person Negan killed, his or her point of view would have to be literally the door of the RV. Because yes, they zoomed out of the RV and zoomed in on the carnage, but they kept the camera straight, which means from the door of the RV to the carnage, straight, which means the victim was literally looking straight at the door of the RV. And why I think it's Abraham is because of this. Because when they zoomed in and they showed that the victim was in fact literally in front of the RV door, I looked at the picture. I looked at several pictures of the season 6 ending. Like I looked at the Negan's point of view, where it's Glenn, Rosita, Daryl, Michonne, Abraham, Maggie, Rick, Sasha, Aaron, Carl, and Eugene. And then I looked at a back view where you see the backs of Rick's group, and they're literally facing Negan, and behind Negan is in fact the RV, right? And who do we see in the point of view? Who do we see literally in front? Like who do we see whose point of view is literally the front of him is in fact the RV door, just like the carnage? Abraham. Because if you look at the end of season 6 where you see the backs of Rick's group, you see their backs, right? And they're looking at Negan, and behind Negan is in fact the RV. Abraham literally is directly in front of the RV door. And when you saw the first look of episode 1, the victim was also literally right there, right directly in front of the RV door, just like Abraham, right? So that's one of the main reasons why I think it's Abraham. Mainly because, and I will go over it again, the corpse is directly in front of the RV door. At the end of season 6, when you see the Rick's group in the lineup, and you see them with their backs to us, and they're looking at Negan and the RV, Abraham is the one that's actually positioned in front of the RV door, just like the corpse was. And then, he's on Rick's right side, just like when we saw Rick with blood smear on his right side, so he's on the right side. Negan said that the victim was pretty tough after taking like 1 or 2 hits from Lucille. Abe's pretty freaking tough. He's already physically strong, he's physically buff, and if I remember correctly, he's former military, so he could take a hit, which pretty much fits with the whole description Negan put when he beat the person, right? And also, the fact that Abraham, again, where he's placed. Like I said with Maggie, if Maggie was killed, there would have been more blood on Rick, right? Because she's literally right next to Rick. if it was Glenn or Daryl, I don't think Rick would have got any blood on his face unless Negan, when he went over to Rick to talk to him, he did like this to his bat and excess blood got on his face. But even if that were true, the way the blood was smeared on his face, totally different from when someone, shakes off blood off a bat and hits you in the face. It'd be more like dots, you know what I mean? Like a little spray of dots. Not that I'm an expert or anything, but I'm just saying. That's why I don't think it's Glenn or Daryl, because Glenn and Daryl are too far away from Rick to actually get that blood smear on his face, and Maggie's too close to Rick to have that small amount of blood on his face. It would be more blood. Abraham is next to Maggie. It's Rick, Maggie, then Abraham. Judging by that alone, I think that it's possible if Negan killed Abraham that he's close enough that Abraham's blood can get on Rick's face, but he's far away enough to the point where, yes, his blood will get on Rick's face, but not too much of his blood will get on him. Like Maggie, for instance, because Maggie's like right there. There's literally a person in between Abraham and Rick. So if Abraham got hit by Negan, if Abraham was in fact the one that got killed, most of his blood would most likely be on Maggie because she's next to him. But because, Rick is right next to Maggie, of course he got some of the blood on his face because he's not that far away. But the fact that Maggie's in between them, of course Maggie would probably most likely get all the blood on her if Abraham was the one that got killed. Okay? Anyway, I'm gonna do with that. Now, Negan. There is a reason why Abraham, Daryl, and Glenn are my top 3 when it comes to who I think Negan killed. Negan mentions in the sneak peek right-hand man. And he mentions it quite a few amount of times during the sneak peek. And the reason why, and because of this, it makes me kind of scared for Daryl, Glenn, and even Abraham. Because remember, everyone knows Daryl is Rick's right-hand man. He even calls Daryl brother, you know what I mean? But keep this also in mind. Like, that's for Daryl, right? Keep this in mind, though. In the beginning, Rick and Daryl never really got along that well. Especially when Daryl found out that Rick handcuffed Merle to a rooftop in Atlanta, right? But who was the one that was helping Rick from the very beginning? Glenn. So in a way, that's almost like Rick's right-hand man as well, you know what I mean? Glenn has been there with Rick since the beginning. When Rick went to Atlanta, who was the first person he met? Well, besides, Morgan and his son, who was the first person in the main group, or in general, besides Morgan and his son, who else did Rick meet? Or let me rephrase it, who was the first person that Rick met in Atlanta, in the Atlanta group? Glenn. They've been through so much together, so to the point where they're practically Glenn is practically a right-hand man. Daryl is obviously a right-hand man because when they first started, getting along, they were practically inseparable. They were like brothers to the point where Rick has even called Daryl his brother, Daryl's always been his right-hand man for the longest time, which is why I'm kind of worried about Daryl and Glenn, especially when Negan has mentioned the word right-hand man several times, especially when Negan asked Rick, was that your right-hand man that I took out? You know what I mean? Negan has actually said that. He actually mentions, Negan mentions he has his own right-hand man. And he's like, well, what about you, Rick? And then he stops and looks at Rick's face like, oh, that person I took out, was that your right-hand man? Right? Which makes it more worrisome for Daryl and Glenn, because Daryl has, for obvious reasons, have been known as the right-hand man of Rick. And then there's Glenn, who's been pretty much helping Rick since the beginning in Atlanta, right? They're both equally right-hand mans to freaking Rick. The reason why it's also applicable to Abraham, because I don't know if you know, like in the comics, like I said, Daryl Dixon does not exist in the comics. In the comics, Abraham does exist, and compared to Daryl doesn't exist in the comics, Abraham does. And in the comics, Abraham is in fact Rick's right-hand man in the comics. So, and they seem to have somewhat of a kind of general and soldier kind of relationship, you know what I mean? Abraham does, it does seem like he respects Rick to the point where it seems like Abraham could be a right-hand man as well. Like, of course, number one right-hand man would be Daryl, and then you got Glenn. Or Daryl and Glenn could be tied for right-hand man, number one right-hand man. And then you get Abe, who's pretty freaking close to being a right-hand man to Rick, if you think about it. Compared to everyone else in Rick's group who are still alive right now, you got Daryl and Glenn, who are like tied for first place right-hand man for Rick. And then you got Abraham, who is the closest thing to a right-hand man right after Daryl and Glenn, right? So when Negan mentioned to Rick, oh, your right-hand man was that person I took out, was that your right-hand man? It made me very worried and made it very possible that the top three suspects for the Negan kill are in fact Abraham, Daryl, and Glenn. Because of that, that phrase that Negan said about, oh, did I take out your right-hand man? And also for the independent reasons that I said in this video and previous videos for Abraham, Daryl, and Glenn. But anyway, that is my opinion of the season 6 finale, the teaser trailer for season 7, the first look of episode 1, and who my top 4 suspects on who Negan killed, why I think they are the top 4 suspects for who Negan killed, and also reasons why they possibly are not the ones that Negan killed. But anyway, I'm gonna make one last video about who Negan, in the sneak peek, Negan did take a certain someone into the RV, and that person could possibly be in danger, and I'm gonna make one last video about that particular moment, and I'll see you guys for that. Bye.